Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this second session of Tolkien, what we're calling Tolkien Dark, with Professor Verlyn Flieger. We had a wonderful session last Monday on Kullervo, Tolkien's rendition of the story of Kullervo from the Kalevala. And today we get the treat of hearing Dr. Flieger again on his lay of Aotrou and Itroun. So it's another session on Tolkien exploring some dark things from a different cultural area. So we've many of you will know Dr. Flieger. She's the author of Splintered Light and of course the editor of both these books we've been discussing over the past week. So I will turn the figurative lecture over to her, and we'll really listen to what he has to say.
Okay, thank you, Carl, and good evening again. Carl is right about Monday's session. I thought it was terrific, so I've got my fingers crossed that maybe we can do it again. I'm going to start with a kind of ad lib. All of these names are difficult to pronounce, like Aotrou and Itroun, with all of the vowels jammed together, and even Kullervo. So here's a tip. In Finnish, the major emphasis is always on the first syllable of the word. So it's always Kullervo, Kalevala, Kullervo, Untamo. All of them hit that first syllable. So if you remember that, you can't go wrong. Now with Aotrou and Itroun, I'm not terribly up on Breton pronunciation, but I believe that it has the accent on the second syllable. So it's Aotrou and Itroun. And if any Breton speakers are listening in and can correct me, I will welcome it. Okay, so this is part 2 of Tolkien Dark, and I didn't find a quote to balance the one we started with last time about writing to express your feelings. But it would be hard to, because Aotrou and Itroun is, in so many ways, while equally dark, profoundly different from the story of Kullervo, and nowhere more than in the idea of feelings. The story of Kullervo is suffused with feeling. Kullervo himself is all feeling. And the whole story, we'll get to Aotrou and Itroun, we are with a different kind of personality and a different kind of mind. And the Lord, Aotrou, that's his title, actually, not his name, seems to be very much less a man of deep feelings than of calculation. So let's go on to the next slide, Carl, and we'll see how this develops. And as usual, questions are welcome anytime they come in. Okay, the second example, while it is as dark as the story of Kullervo, differs from that earlier work in that its darkness derives from cold self-interest rather than the heat of passion. We can feel some pity for Kullervo, battered by fate. But I personally find it very hard to find any sympathy for Aotrou, whose story is one of pride, ambition, calculation, and deception. And all of those tilt toward the sort of cold side of the spectrum, the self-interested side, the calculating side. So we'll see how this plays out. And Carl, can we go to the next slide? Okay, I'm hoping that all of you have read the poem, which is not all that long, about how demands her payment. And it is a lord's sexual favor. When he refuses, she curses him with death. Protesting that he will die when God doth please, he nevertheless is dead within 3 days, leaving his wife to die of grief, and nothing says what happens to the poor misbegotten children. Okay, I got a question coming in here. Brenton Dickinson says, I quite agree with your reading of Aotrou, calculating, anxious to blame rather than take responsibility, falling on Christendom rather than his own choices. However, I am intrigued by Itroun's love and their joy. That gives me pause about his character. I can understand that. It would, because there are many things in this poem that seem at first glance to be contradictory. Certainly, Tolkien's depiction of the joy is real, although it seems to be more on Itroun's side. I think the narrative voice says that Aotrou puts on a mask of joy, of mirth. So he's somebody who's constantly trying to control the situation and to conceal himself behind some sort of outward appearance. Okay, so on to the next slide. We're going to be working with the story from now on, but we're also going to be looking at the background. Here's the history of it. The poem itself, as we have it, was written around 1929 to 1930. Interestingly, at about the same time that Tolkien was working on the Lay of Leithian, another lay, a long Breton-style poem. So he was moving back and forth between these two. It was published in 1945 in the Welsh Review, and it was out of print for the next 70 years, although there were sort of bootleg versions on the net that people could have access to. And there is, of course, the lavishly illustrated and very meticulous Serbian edition in dual language, both Serbian and Breton, that was republished last year. Now, this poem is notable within Tolkien's canon for its explicit reliance on Celtic legend. Tolkien tends to dismiss Celtic, although recent scholarship has begun to show that he was a lot more dependent on it than he wanted to let on. But it also is notable for its setting, which is Broceliande, traditionally associated with the pagan elements of Arthurian myth and legend. It's a storied, magical forest. It's where the wizard Merlin is supposed to be, to this very day, imprisoned inside a stone. So it has all kinds of magical associations. But unlike the story of Kullervo, Aotrou and Itroun is less an adaptation than a drastic revision of the existing material, redirecting the plot and changing the dynamic. And this may, as it plays out, begin to address your question, Brenton. Okay? Tolkien took Kullervo almost entirely from Kalevala. He dressed it up a little bit, but the story is basically what Tolkien found, and he didn't change it. That's not true with Aotrou and Itroun, but we want to go through the steps by which he arrived at this poem. So here goes for the next slide if we can. All right, he got it from Théodore Ersart de la Villemarquais' Barzaz-Breiz, Ballads and Songs of Brittany, which is a collection of Breton ballads and stories and history and folklore, which was the Kalevala of Brittany. Villemarquais hoped to do for Brittany the same thing that Lonrot had done. Is there a bear in the room? No, it's a dog. Perhaps somebody could pet the dog and kind of get him quiet. Or not. We'll see. In any case, Tolkien had a mad period of book buying in the 19th.
Muted.
He was buying everything he could lay his hands on about myth and folklore and language. He bought something like 100 or so books on Celtic myth and legend and language. And in 1922, he bought the 2-volume 1846 edition of Barzaz-Breiz. This is what it looks like. My copy has a rubber band around it because the front cover has come off. But it's an old book, about 170 years old, and it's a little delicate. But this is the same edition that Tolkien used. Now, he first chose 2 reasonably short songs or ballads or lays to rework. He picked Arbugel about a changeling child, and Aotrou hag ar Korrigan, that's not Breton pronunciation, I'm here to tell you, a traditional tale of a fairy woman's entrapment of a mortal man. But those became then his sort of springboard for his rewriting of the second one, Aotrou, Lord Nan, into a new and much, much longer poem, adding a new element that is simply not present in the first one, the Lord's desire for an heir. And that worked to completely redirect the plot and to change profoundly also the theme. So much for Villemarquais. We'll now get on to Tolkien and how Tolkien used his sources. Next slide, please. Okay, the first one that he worked with, Arbugel is a Celtic folktale. He had a dual language translation, and the French translation of Arbugel is l'enfant supposé, the presumed child or the substitute child. So I'm presuming that that's kind of what Arbugel means. R is the definite article, the. Bugel, as my note tells you, means child in Breton. So it's the child like, that's his name, and I do not know what heat means. Probably kidnapped, pretend, something like that. What's interesting is that the word spelled B-U-G-E-L is phonetically and orthographically very close to the Welsh bwg or bwgwl, with W replacing the U, and Welsh W means double U, which means terrifying. Breton is very close to Welsh, so close that in the early medieval period, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, Welsh and Bretons could understand each other, kind of like Spanish and Portuguese, that sort of thing. So these words, which are orthographically, spellingly close to the Breton word for child, also mean terrifying and goblin. And there may be, you know, a play on words here, that this child is really the goblin child. Now, a mother has her child stolen from its cradle by a Korrigan, and we're going to talk more about that word, and replaced with a changeling. The mother appeals to Mary in heaven, who instructs her to boil acorns in an eggshell. The odd sight will make the changeling speak, which will betray his identity. And sure enough, she boils the acorns, and he exclaims in wonder and reveals himself. She beats him, he disappears, and she finds her own child back in his cradle. So the story ends happily. Next slide, Carl. Oh, wait, we're getting questions in here. Tim Fisher says, if it won't damage your copy, could we see the title page, and are there any illustrations? I will be happy to show you the title page, but I have to do it very carefully because it is a really, really old book. And no, Tim, there are no illustrations, but the back of the second volume includes the music, the tunes to the folk songs that these poems were set to. Okay, Tim has another question. These are Breton poems, separate stories, or one tale and separate poems? The Breton poems are all separate. Each one is individual, collected in a different area by different singers, and just all thrown together in these two volumes. What Tolkien did was a little different, as we will see. Sometime in the late 20s, Tolkien adapted our Bugalaithit as the Korrigan one. He kept the story, he changed the Breton rhymed tercets. It's a 3-line stanza, rhyme and with end rhyme, with a 4-line AABB ballad stanza. So it's AAB and then a short sort of tagline to round off the stanza. He also substituted for the beating a cross-hilt sword that is hanging on the wall. When the mother raises it, the elf child will see the cross and, quote, the spell will fall. But otherwise, in terms of plot, it follows very closely the Breton source. In both the Breton poem and Tolkien's, it's a dialogue between Mary on earth and Mary in heaven, both mothers, in which Mary in heaven counsels and advises Mary on earth how to get back her child. So if we can get to the next slide. I've got a question coming in, and it's a real interesting one, so hold on just a minute. Kate Neville says, oh my, have you ever tried seeing if the tunes from your Breton book fit any of Tolkien's songs? I haven't, but Nancy March, the editor of Beyond Bree, has. And she is the one who went to the back of the book and found the songs. So if you're interested in that, Kate, and of course you are, as you should be, get in touch with Nancy March and have her tell you all about it, because she was very enterprising. She looked up the whole thing. Okay, so on to the next, Carl, please. Now we get to the second poem, which is longer and which is what's traditionally called a lay. It really just means a long narrative in verse, but lays tend to be longer and more discursive than some of the short folk songs. It's called Aotrou nan hag ar Korrigan, Lord Nan. Aotrou, Lord, is his title, and Nan is his name, and the Korrigan. So this brings in the dynamic much more than the earlier little folk tale did. When Lord Nan's wife craves venison after giving birth to twins, he goes hunting in the forest. A white deer leads him to a grotto with a stream, and when he dismounts to drink, he is accosted by the Korrigan. She threatens him with death if he will not wed, that is to say, sleep with her. He refuses, and on returning home falls sick and dies in 3 days. His wife dies of grief, and from their graves 2 trees sprout up, from whose branches 2 doves fly up to heaven. So it doesn't have quite the happy ending of our Bugalakheit, where Korrigan won, but there is a kind of transcendence that the Lord and his wife have died, but the trees somehow embody them, and their spirits fly up into the skies. So let's see what Tolkien did with that. And while we're getting it, I got some questions. No more questions. Fine. Okay, Tolkien's Korrigan 2 follows closely the plot of the Breton source. He linked it to Korrigan 1 by the shared title and the consecutive numbering, treating the poems as a two-part presentation of a familiar figure, the Korrigan. First the baby stealer, next the fatal woman, the fairy seductress who brings death to men. But the question, Tim, I think it was your question about are these separate stories, is handled, in a sense, by Tolkien, who puts his versions together as Korrigan 1 and Korrigan 2. He doesn't use the Breton titles. And what he makes out of these 2 poems then is a kind of diptych, a 2-panel picture of topics that are kind of on the same theme or subject. And the thing that hinges them together, of course, is the Korrigan, who is the uniting factor. And we're now beginning to see that Tolkien is going somewhere with all of this. He isn't just adapting. He's starting to flex his muscles as a maker himself. So on to the next slide, Carl, if you please. A little bit of information about Korrigans. The word is Breton. There are several words for the same kind of figure. Korrigans are also called nines, polpegans. These are Breton words, and sometimes called fays, particularly in Villemarquet's dual language, where he's got the Breton and the French, and where he has Korrigan or none on one page. He's got fae on the other page. They are shape changers, baby stealers, demon lovers, usually inimical to humans, but attracted to them. And while the concept includes males, almost all the stories are about females. Now I've got a note here to myself and to you. Celtic mythology itself has a strong tradition of unions between fairies and mortals. Sometimes these are forced or coerced. Sometimes they are consensual. They almost always end badly when the mortal dies either of old age or of some kind of disappointment. Cuchulainn, Thomas Rhymer, Tam Lin, Art, son of Khan, all of these are Celtic stories of mortals. And all of these guys that I mentioned here are mortals who get involved with a fairy woman. So Tolkien was consciously already working within a tradition. Okay, next to the next slide. Got a question here from Andy. Am I right he leaves the 2 trees from the Breton version out of his version? Yeah, he doesn't use the trees. We'll talk about what he does do. My first read of the Breton version made me think of the early poem about 2 trees coming together. I think that's one of the ones that he wrote for Edith, but I'm not sure. I think it's the one that starts, "Lo, we are young and long have stood." It's quoted in Carpenter, you're quite right. I think you're on the right track, Andy, in that there was something going on here that had Tolkien working with some kind of love story. But I think we've got to be really, really careful that we do not equate Tolkien's feelings for Edith with this situation between Aotrou and the Korrigan. So, traditionally what happens is that in these stories of fairy and seduction, the supernatural is the one who lures or seduces the mortal. And the mortal either then goes with her and lives several lifetimes and dies of old age when he comes back, or rejects her and then dies, presumably of punishment, or pines and longs for her. Keats's La Belle Dame sans Merci is about a knight who has been abandoned by his fairy lover, the beautiful lady without mercy. And he's clearly sick and gonna die. Now, Tolkien put his own spin on the plot, and this is where it gets really interesting. Successive drafts show how he changed the story. And he changed it quite consciously and quite deliberately. Having Aotrou seek out the Korrigan for his own reasons, he goes to her, and only on the second encounter be lured back by the white deer. Tolkien's phrases describing Aotrou's mental state when he resolves to seek the Korrigan's help go from a mad and monstrous reed in the rough drafts to cold counsel then he took. So Tolkien changes him from a guy who's a little bit off his rocker to somebody who is calculating, scheming, planning. He's not mad. He knows exactly what he's doing. The interesting thing is that his scheming is matched by the Korrigans, who also knows exactly what she's doing. So the two of them seem to be matched with each other in Tolkien's version. Okay, next slide. Shall we go? Okay. So we're still looking at Tolkien at work. The common element, the common denominator in all three poems, the one about the changeling child, the one about Lord Nan, and Tolkien's own, is the figure of the Korrigan. Although in Korrigan 1 she's off stage, and you never see her and she never speaks, she is nevertheless the agent that drives that poem's situation. In Korrigan 2, she is an active player, quite visible and clearly an agent of evil in first luring and trapping and then bringing death to the innocent lord. He's just trying to do something nice for his wife. She says, "Oh, honey, I really would love some venison." And he's on his horse and off into the forest, and he's going to bring her back what she craves as a kind of birthday gift. Unfortunately, he falls afoul of the Korrigan's wiles, which lure him and entrap him. And there's some suggestion that the white deer is also the Korrigan. If she's not, she is certainly the Korrigan's messenger. So Tolkien has changed the game, and changed it dramatically, shifting the agency from the Korrigan to the Lord, to Aotrou, who brings about his own death. First, by seeking a potion from the Korrigan. Second, by rejecting her advances and thereby refusing to pay her price. So this is a big shift from the raw material that Tolkien was working with. He has darkened the poem. He has introduced a whole new range of motives for the Lord, none of which redound to his credit. There is also a strong sexual undercurrent that runs through the poem, as it does through the Celtic primary sources. First in Aotrou's use of sex to preserve his heritage, and he's quite coldly manipulative of his wife. "Honey, drink this and then let's go to bed." And in the Korrigan's attempted seduction and her promise to him of, and I'm quoting, "bliss more deep than mortals feel." What she's saying to him is, "You've never had it until you've had it with me. You will dwell with me in drury, that is lovemaking, here in the forest where the nights are so long." She is using all of her wiles to sexually entice him. Okay, can we have, Carl, the next slide, please? Now, the themes are different in Tolkien's version as well. Those of you who have read the poem, and I'm hoping that that's a lot of you, will see that there's a tremendous attention to nature, to wind, to waves. In Britain's land beyond the seas are stony hills and stony caves, forests, fountains. It's a world suffused with nature, with natural life, and also with the pagan worship of nature. Over against that seems to be balanced Christianity, associated with rituals, bells, churching, candles, prayers. There's a sort of 1-2 conversation here between the pagan and the Christian, but it seems pretty clear that in terms of length and in terms of power, the pagan is the more persuasive of the two, what do we call them, outlooks, at least. Okay, but there's also the theme of Faust, very, very clearly, the unholy bargain. Remember that the Lord in the Breton poem made no bargain. He was kind of ambushed by the Korrigan. Tolkien's Lord, quite consciously, made a bargain, went to the Korrigan, and if you've read the poem, you know that Tolkien really took time over his riding deep into the woods, the sun sinking, the shadows falling, his going to the seat of the witch with dragging feet, with hanging head. So he's very aware of what he's doing. He's also aware that there's going to be a price and that he may not like it. The end of the poem, and this speaks to your question, Andy, ends not with 2 trees or 2 doves flying up to heaven, but with the Lord dead, the lady dead, the children abandoned, and a prayer to Mary Maiden, pure and clean. Of Lord and Lady all is said, God rest their souls who now are dead. God keep us all in hope and prayer from evil rede and from despair until we can get to heaven where is seen the Maiden Mary pure and clean. So there's a definite tweaking of the end in which there is no redemption for the Lord, but instead the prayer that other people may be advised not to make his mistake. But it's a pretty weak ending to a very powerful story. It doesn't seem to match in power the figure of the Korrigan and the Lord's interchanges. So what are we to make of this? Is it a story with a moral? Don't mess with magic? Or is it a deeper exploration of the power of pagan forces? I'm hoping that I'll throw that question out to you because I would like very much to hear the way that you read what I find to be a very strange poem coming from the pen of J.R.R. Tolkien. In any case, no questions yet, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, Tolkien didn't stop here. He clearly was very, very interested in the figure of the Korrigan. First of all, she's the common denominator in all 3 of these poems. The first 2 poems are retitled with her epithet, the Korrigan. She very clearly shows up, a little bit changed, but nonetheless recognizable in Tolkien's Fall of Arthur, which was written in the early 30s, that is to say, not too long after his work on Aotrou and Itroun. If you've read that poem, and I sure hope that you have, you will remember that the narrator twice, and one of the characters once, refers to Guinevere as Fey woman, fairy woman. And she's, in a sense, she is taking the place of the traditional Arthurian Fey woman, Morgan Le Fay. If you are interested in this, there's a very, very good article coming out in Serena Higgins' The Inklings and Arthur by Alyssa House Thomas, who did her dissertation on the fall of Arthur and on Tolkien's presentation of Guinevere. And she goes into this whole question quite thoroughly. So I highly recommend that you have a look at her article. But he didn't stop with Guinevere. Galadriel, very clearly in The Lord of the Rings, is a kind of Korrigan turned inside out. She is a mysterious lady. She lives in the woods. She has a fountain. She has a phial that she gives to a traveler who comes to her seeking help. All the parallels are there, including her long golden hair. But they are completely reversed, so that she, except for one moment, is kind of Tolkien's anti-Korrigan. But the one moment is pretty powerful. And I think it's on the next slide. Can we look and see, Carl? Oh, first I did Guinevere. Okay. Well, there it is. I've already said it. I forgot I had this on the slide. So can we go to the next one? Okay. Who can forget this moment in the chapter called The Mirror of Galadriel, when Frodo turns to Galadriel and offers her the ring. And she kind of goes wild. At last, what I have longed for, and now you bring it to me. You're going to give it to me. Wouldn't that be something? And she says, in place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. That's quite a line. Love her and despair. If she is not a fatal woman in that moment, out to destroy those who love her, I have never seen one. And then Tolkien switches it again. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. And then she shrinks and becomes again the simple elf woman. And she says, I passed the test. I will remain Galadriel. I will not become the Korrigan. I will diminish and go into the West. So Tolkien gets her off the hook. What's interesting to me is that he put her there in the first place, that he sought to include this moment, which is, in a sense, so suffused with the mood and the atmosphere of Aotrou and Itroun, and give it to Galadriel and let it rip, and then take it down again. But the figure of the Korrigan is a hugely important piece of his myth making, and I feel I can't can't emphasize that too strongly. Okay, so we're having some questions here. Ben Vedder says, but isn't Galadriel the exact inversion of the Korrigan? Yeah, you bet she is. But for this one moment, when she grows, when she takes it on, she is the Korrigan. And I don't think we can ignore that moment, which works so much better in words than it did in the film, which looked kind of silly. So Ben Vedder says, instead of the Dark Lord, you would have a Korrigan in many respects. Yeah, I think you would. But what I want to set up, what I'm hoping that we track here, is Tolkien's interest in the Korrigan as a character. In many ways, kind of like Kullervo, that he just couldn't let go of. He's gotta put it here or put it there or change it around. Her association with Guinevere is plain as it can be. In addition to Fey woman, Tolkien surrounds her with all kinds of magical images. Her father's land is called the Hidden Kingdom. She's associated with shadow. She's associated with magic, and with leading men to ruin. In Tolkien's poem, she leads Arthur, Lancelot, and Mordred to destruction. So Tolkien was very clearly working with the notion in his Fall of Arthur of Guinevere as the fatal woman. And he is notable, pretty much unique in Arthurian literature in taking her that far. A lot of the storytellers give her a hard time. They don't like her because she's mean to the Knights of the Round Table, but they don't go as far as Tolkien does. He makes her an out-and-out, cold, calculating temptress, ready to destroy men for her own pleasure. And that is really the case that we have with Tolkien's Korrigan, who in his poem, his adaptation of Aotrou has 3 appearances. First, she's a witch when the Lord rides into the wood and seeks her out, and the word that Tolkien uses there is witch. When he goes back the second time and is led astray by the white deer, he uses the word fey. He doesn't describe her in the first meeting, just that she's sitting cold, alone, on seat of stone, and that she understands his motives. In the second meeting, she is the temptress, the seductress, standing in a pool of water, combing out her long tresses with a comb of gold. And she clearly there is meant to be represented as a conscious seducer. Her third appearance is hallucinatory because it's in the Lord's dream. When he turns away, when he refuses her, and she says, "In 3 days thou shalt die." And by the way, he says, "Oh no, I won't. God will take care of me. I will die in the brave wars of Christendom, and I will die when it God doth please." He's wrong, but that's his defense. But when he rides back, he's already sickening. When he gets home, he says, put me to bed. And when he is in bed, he has a terrible dream that he sees the Korrigan in her grotto on her seat of stone, but now she is old, ugly, wizened, gnarled, gray-haired, raking, not combing, her tresses with a comb of bone, and sort of horribly haunting him by saying, my fee, give me my fee. And at this point, we don't know whether that's really the Korrigan or not. What we do know is that that's how Tolkien wanted Aotrou to see the Korrigan, finally. It's a terrific poem, but it's very, very strange. Have I got any questions here? Ah, yes, I do. Okay, Tom Hillman says, at this moment, fair is foul and foul is fair. Okay, let's hear it from Macbeth. A play that Tolkien said he didn't like very much, but that never stopped him from borrowing from things. Kate Neville says, interesting that she calls herself, this is Galadriel, a potential queen, a title which she does not claim in Middle-earth. She's just the Lady of Lorien. Yes, it is interesting. And when Tolkien came to write her backstory, which is after all of this was put in place, he expanded the notion that Galadriel saw herself as a queen. Galadriel is a rebel. She goes with the Noldor. She follows Feanor, who, by the way, wants a couple of tresses of her hair, a couple of strands of her hair, and she won't give them to him. So Tolkien's Galadriel, in her associations, in this one scene, this moment that Tolkien gives her, and in the backstory that he then went on to write, is not such a nice person. A lot of people, if you look at the letters, Tolkien's letters, people wrote to him apparently and said, I think Galadriel is so much like the Virgin Mary. And Tolkien was very careful not to hurt people's feelings. But he did say, actually, she's not, she's beautiful, but she was a rebel. So the strand of Korrigan-ness, in a way, is something that, like Kullervo, runs all the way through Tolkien's work. The fatal woman, the mysterious woman, the woman in the wood most of the time. And I guess she culminates in Galadriel, but of course you're right, she is the reverse of Galadriel. Now Tom Hillman says the Rohirrim and at least some of the men of Gondor see Galadriel as like the Korrigan. Interesting. That's very interesting, Tom. But now, work with this. It's not the Rohirrim and some of the men of Gondor who indeed see her as the sorceress in the Golden Wood. Boromir, too. That's Tolkien putting those words in their mouths. That's Tolkien wanting people in Middle-earth, maybe wrongly, but still, to see Galadriel as the sorceress in the wood. His crafting of her is much richer, much deeper and multi-dimensional, more multi-dimensional than the Galadriel whose image we're likely to carry away from us. Everybody loves Galadriel. She's blonde, she's beautiful, she can read your mind, and she gives you presents. But there's more to her. Okay, Ben says, In Middle-earth, there are quite a few anti-Korrigans. Yes, good point. Lúthien and Arwen. Okay, Lúthien, a fairy in the wood, who immediately found by a man who immediately falls in love with her. Yes, Melian, the same. Fingal sees her first, singing, and a wood grows up around them. They stand staring at each other for so long. So all of these images, all of these motifs, all of these various ideas were really, really churning around in Tolkien for much of his creative life. There's even, I won't call her a Korrigan, but there's a mysterious woman in the wood in the story of Kullervo, the blue-robed lady of the forest, who is the one who meets Kullervo and says, here's the road you should take. Don't go that way. That's bad luck. And of course, he does go that way, and it is bad luck. So she's not evil, but she is an omen of what might happen to him. And you find that lady, the lady in the wood, coming up again and again and again in Tolkien's work. Now, the quick association, and I'm not saying it's wrong, is Tolkien's wife, Edith, who, as anybody who has read Humphrey Carpenter or the letters knows, did have long, luxuriant hair and did dance for Tolkien in a wood. So we can't really discount that memory, which he carried with him all his life, and which he, of course, folded into the character of Lúthien, for sure. But she seems to be maybe just the springboard for this mysterious, really mysterious, and dangerous woman. Even Aragorn, when Boromir says, and I have to sort of paraphrase, I think Lorien is dangerous, and I don't like that lady in the golden wood. And Aragorn says, yes, she is dangerous, but you bring the danger with you. It doesn't reside with her. Okay, Ben Vedder says Goldberry is a non-Korrigan in a way. She is certainly the lady in the wood. She doesn't entrap anybody, and she seems to be close to the Korrigan, but closer to a sort of high medieval woman called Lady Nature, because she is associated with flowers, she's associated with rain. But in general, I'm seeing all of these questions, and I'm hearing you looking around now for the image of this woman, and you're finding it. Whatever guise Tolkien put it into, however he chose to feed it into the story or tweak it, there she is. So Kate says, so perhaps this Korrigan is an image of what might have happened to the elves had they not gone into the West. Ooh, that's a dynamite question, Kate. I daren't say yes, but I would be crazy if I said no. She certainly has that potential, for sure. It's so powerful an image and so provocative that we are all sort of encouraged to look here, there, and everywhere to find versions of it and hints of it. So I can't say that you're wrong, but if I say yes, No, I can't say yes. Everybody would quote me and it would hit the fan. I can't do that. But I think that your instinct is a very sound one. Can I put it that way? Okay, Tom Hillman says, but in the original Bombadil poem, Goldberry tries to pull Tom under. By gum. You are right. It's presented as playful because many of those early Bombadil poems have Bombadil as kind of the butt of the joke, the big clumsy guy. But yeah, she does. No question about it. Well, as usual, I'm getting more than I bargained for with all of these questions and interpretations. I think we've got 25 minutes. We may not even use it all up, but can we go to the next slide, please? By the way, I don't mean to disencourage anybody, especially Kate. Just keep the questions coming. Okay, here is my challenge to you. The presence of Kullervo haunts Middle-earth, as we discussed on Monday, showing up in Turin, Gollum, Wormtongue, Frodo, and a host of others, as your questions and comments made plain. We've seen how this mysterious lady weaves her way through Tolkien's mind and his stories. Where does anybody see Aotrou in any of the later parts of Tolkien's story? Take all the time you need. Oh, Kate has said it. Denethor. Absolutely. And Kate, can you, I know you'll have to type this out, but can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think you're absolutely right, but I would love it to come from you. And I will read your answer. In his calculation to use the Palantir. Absolutely. And in, I think, really, his calculating stance in every scene that Tolkien presents him in, including the mad scene, where he wants to burn Faramir. Yeah, Denethor is cold. Denethor has his eye on everything. Denethor is not a loving person. Not at all. Not even particularly loving to his son Faramir until it's too late. Yeah, I think I would agree with you 100%. I think there's a straight line from Aotrou to Denethor. And Kate says, and the price he pays, okay, I'm with you, and his pride. Yes, very much yes. He is proud. He is proud of his status. He would like it to be more secure. Can I build on what you're saying a little bit to suggest that one of the things that Denethor wants is for the steward to continue in his job? He's concerned about his place. He's concerned about his posterity. Yeah, I think entirely so. Does anybody else agree? Can I hear from some people? Takes a while to type, huh? I know. But is this not a strange, apparently untypical poem for Tolkien to be writing? I can't ask for a show of hands how many of you have read the poem, but I would just like, while other questions are coming in, to read you a little bit that Tolkien writes about him. Kate, by the way, says, and his link to his desire for his line to continue. Yes. Yeah, I think more and more there's a learned article there for somebody if they want to write it. But listen to what Tolkien says about the Lord. There sprang the day with weather fair, for windy rain had washed the air, and blue and cloudless, clean and high above the hills was arched the sky, and foaming in the northern breeze beneath the sky there shone the seas. Arising then to greet the sun and day with a new thought begun, the Lord in guise of joy him clad. He can't even be really, genuinely happy. He puts on joy like a suit of clothes and masked his mind in manner glad. His mouth unwonted laughter used and words of mirth. He oft had mused, walking alone with furrowed brow, a feast he bade prepare him now. And Itroun mine, he said, my life, 'tis long that thou hast been my wife. Too swiftly by in love do slip our gentle years, and as a ship returns to port, we soon shall find once more that day of spring we mind, when we were wed and bells were rung. But still we love, and still are young. A merry feast we'll make this year, and there shall come no sign or tear, and we will feign our love begun in joy anew to run down happy paths. And yet, maybe, we'll pray that this year we may see our heart's desire more quick draw nigh than yet we've seen it, thou and I. For virtue is in hope and prayer. So spake he gravely, seeming fair. Now I want to ask you to consider that line. Virtue is in hope and prayer. This is a man who has just made a bargain with a Korrigan. This is not hope or prayer. This is a line that he is feeding his wife while he slips a drug into her drink and then takes her to bed. He's not only cold and calculating, he is, which I don't think Denethor knowingly is, a hypocrite. He's a thoroughly unpleasant character. Now, poor old Kullervo, for all that he's crooked and bent and knotted and ill-favored and grumpy and gloomy and angry and self-pitying and all of the things that we said last time, he's at least genuine. He feels what he feels, and it's easy, I think, for the reader, just because things get piled on him, to feel some pity for the poor guy who's getting hit over and over and over and over again. But I personally do not feel any pity for Aotrou. He made his bed and he gets to lie on it. I do feel pity for his wife. And I would ask you also to consider that Aotrou instructs his household not to tell her that he has come home or to tell her that he is sick. He withholds all of that information from her. And there is no real explanation as to why. It's worth noting, I think, that he never repents. He never expresses regret or sorrow. He has a terrible hallucinatory dream in which the Korrigan comes to him again and claims her fee. But as a Christian man who says, I will die when God doth please, in the brave wars of Christendom, he makes no move to even ask for absolution or forgiveness or help. He's intransigent to the very end. And I think that too, Kate, and I'm going back to your notion of Denethor, I think that speaks to Denethor, who never gives in, who never expresses regret, who holds to his bargain and to the palantir into his death. It's hard, once you've really looked at Aotrou, not to see him in Denethor. And his image should really make us take a very long, very close look at Denethor and what he is doing in the story of the Lord of the Rings. Why is he there? The traditional answer is he's there to balance Theoden. When the two hobbits split up, Merry goes with Theoden, the good chieftain, and Pippin, the harum-scarum, goes with Denethor, the calculating, scheming guy who lives in his head. And there is a kind of irony in that. But he also is there to look at leaders who make the wrong decisions. Now I'm looking at my question box, and I haven't got anything more except that last one from Kate Neville. I hope that I haven't talked you into complete silence, because I was hoping that this would wake you up, would make you look again at the Lord of the Rings and see other people, hear other cold voices, see Aotrou working like yeast in Tolkien's imagination. Denethor is right on the money, but is there anybody else? Ah, here they're coming in now. Tim says, the Korrigan returns seeking her fee, and Aotrou is forced to choose between betraying his marriage and losing his life. This quote is from the Amazon description, which was the quote that Amazon was given by the publisher. So is he to be dismissed as calculating or empathized with as caught in a tragic dilemma? The way I read it, Tim, he is to be dismissed as calculating, not as caught in a tragic dilemma. He is forced to choose between sleeping with the Korrigan and losing his life. He does say, I'm not going to sleep with you, I'm a married man. But he's already made his bargain. It's up to her to set the price. And she said that she would. I can't feel any sympathy for him. He asked for something knowing he would have to pay, and then reneged on his bargain. Kate says, right kingship. And I don't know quite where that comes in, Kate, so I need some help on that. Andy says Denethor is certainly a lesson in not messing with magic. Okay, he's also the only one to say the word pagan. Well, does he say pagan? Gandalf says heathen. But he might be. I don't have my copy in front of me. Ben Vetter says Aotrou knows that someone who has made a deal with a fairy or devil has to bear the consequences himself. I would agree with you, Ben. That's why I called it a Faustian bargain. You're perfectly happy to have it until you get the bill, and then you don't want to pay it. Kate says, oh, kingship is the contrastive motive for using the palantir. Okay, yes, yeah, I would agree. Joyce Sturgill says, did I pronounce that right? I'll never know. Joyce Sturgill says, Kullervo evokes the same sense of tragedy as Hamlet, but Aotrou to me seems more like Shakespeare's Richard III. I would agree. Somebody who does what he does in full knowledge of what he is doing. Yeah, absolutely. No redeeming features? Well, Tim would like to defend him. And it is true that the Korrigan's price would make him abuse his marriage vows or break his marriage vows. And to that extent, Amazon may have a point. But I would say a man who sleeps with his wife after giving her wine only so that he can get the child he wants is, in a sense, also being unfaithful to his marriage vows. I know that's kind of a radical reading of it, but the more I read this poem, the less I like Aotrou, and the less I like his treatment of his wife, who never finds out. She goes to her grave not knowing what he did. She almost goes to her grave not knowing that he's dead, except she finally does find his body. Tim Fisher says, oh, Joyce Sturgill tells me I'm pronouncing her name right. Thank you very much. You also say, Joyce, Faust's sin is the prime one, pride. Well, yes, pride, but also ambition in a way, trying to get something beyond what you have. With Faust, it's knowledge. He wants all knowledge. And that can be a very, very dangerous thing, as we know. And Aotrou wants to go beyond what his life is. He wants to reach out beyond the limits of his life and get something extra. And I would call that ambition, which is a kind of pride. I would agree with you. Tim says, Aotrou resembles Macbeth, with Lady Macbeth and the witches as various Korrigans. Not a bad comparison. It's an old, old story. And Macbeth, as we know, is absolutely the most folkloric of Shakespeare's plays. A Freudian slip there. And is based entirely in and draws on a lot of Scottish Celtic myth. So it's very possible that Shakespeare was playing with a number of these themes, tropes, motifs that come up again and again. And Lady Macbeth becomes a kind of Korrigan in that she persuades him. She also says, to bed, and invokes her sexuality. All right, Joyce says, I don't see it as breaking the vows so much as lowering himself to sleep with an inferior. Well, wait a minute. breaking the vows with the Korrigan. Well, that's moot, really, because Tolkien doesn't editorialize. The narrator doesn't say at this point. He just has Aotrou say, "No, I won't. My wife is wed. I have a wife. My wife now lieth in childbed." So you may have a point there. But is she an inferior if she holds the key to what he wants? In a sense, she is, although he may not see it this way, much superior to him. Andy says, I was waiting for this. Thank you, Andy. Okay, crazy idea, perhaps Saruman, you bet. Who was seduced by power, who wanted more by engaging with dark forces, calculating cold, a mind of metal and wheels. Indeed. I think Saruman, too, has more than a little taint of Aotrou. He dabbles in magic. It's not the same kind of magic, but he is the one who turns to ring lore. Now, I got to be very careful. I do not want to equate the Korrigan with the ring. We're not going there. But he does, as Aotrou does, turn to a dark force to get what he wants and is seduced by it. All right. Now Tim says, repeat, does Aotrou resemble Saruman? But who is his Korrigan? I think I just answered you, Tim. I'm not sure. You'll have to let me know whether I did. I was getting to the point of saying the ring is his Korrigan. Any agreement? Disagreement? From anybody else? Well, none so far, although with this group, questions tend to keep coming in until the very last minute. I hope that I've sold you on Tolkien's dark side, because I think it's very definitely there. I don't think he could have written The Lord of the Rings without it. And I think it is the balance to so much in The Lord of the Rings that is wonderful and beautiful and memorable, and that you want to hang on to. Nothing more from Tim, but Van Vetter says, there's one big question. Is the ring sentient? Tolkien leaves that open, Ben, I think. He says it found its way to Gollum from Isildur. Certainly it is sentient in the film, but I think Peter Jackson is taking that ball and running with it. I don't know that the ring is sentient in Tolkien's story and in his words, and I think he's very careful not to make that explicit. He wrote to Rona Bear back in the late 50s or early 60s, you cannot push the ring too far. That is, you can't dissect it. You can't define it. It works best when you see how it works on other people, rather than by looking at what the ring does itself. So I think Tolkien very wisely fudged that one and said, I don't want to go there. You can't push it that far because that's not really the way it works. Okay, Brenton Dickinson says, I'm on your side about the Aotrou reading. It seems to me the tale turns on I know thee not. That Aotrou speaks while trespassing after the children are born. If he had reacted differently, the consequences may not have been his body or his life, but some other gift. I love it that you're on my side, but I think you're being too kind to the whole situation. In terms of the whole context of Celtic folklore, what the woman in the wood, what the fairy woman wants, is the body of the mortal man. So I don't think she just got angry and hurt when he said, I know thee not, and might have presented a different bill to him. When he first offers her gold, in their very first encounter, when she gives him the file, she says, no, let's defer payment. First, let's see if it works. Lots of times I've been accused of cheating, and I want you to know that I make good on my bargains, but then I'll claim my price. It may be gold, it may be other wealth you hold. So there's already a sort of foreshadowing that he's got something that she wants. And I think that's part of the really quite explicit sexuality that runs through this particular poem. Ben says, if not, it's a bad Korrigan, I think, but then that's a tautology. Korrigans are bad. By definition, you can't have a good Korrigan, because then she wouldn't be a Korrigan. The clock is striking. It is 7 o'clock. We have once again managed to fill out an hour and a half with some very, very good discussion. I wish we had more time. Well, we've got 2 more questions, but we got to cut it short. Ben Vetter says, so there's the Harry Potter rule, don't trust anything thinking if you don't see where it has its brain. Oh, I would go farther than that. I think Tolkien is a great deal darker than J.K. Rowling. And Brenton Dickinson says, following up on that, she may have wanted one of the children instead. I think you're giving her too much credit. Korrigans steal children. They don't bargain for them. I see the association that you're making, and I think it is an interesting one, and it's frankly one I hadn't thought of. But I think she's out for his body, pure and simple, and not one of his children, because she doesn't come for them. What she does have, and this is so ironic on Tolkien's part, she has the last laugh. When he dies, and his wife dies, and nobody knows what happens to the children. In deep in dim Broceliande, a silver fountain flowed and fell. Within a darkly woven dell, and in the homeless hills, a dale was filled with laughter, cold and pale. That's a pretty good note to end on, and I think I will. Good night. Thank you all for listening. Hope I see you again.
If you enjoyed this seminar, please consider making a small donation to Signum University. Your gift will help us continue to make the seminar series and other great content available for free to the public. Just go to signumuniversity.org/fund/donate/seminars. Thanks!